Over the course of the MA, I've been coming to the realisation that the subject matter I'm most drawn to is non-fiction. I've always been more of a listener than a talker, an observer rather than a participant, preferring to go unnoticed, preferring to hear the opinions of others rather than voicing my own. This is something I'm currently working on in therapy. However, this proclivity towards observation has led to a curiosity around people. Why they do what they do, how strange they are, how wonderful, and how awful. In the past, I had daydreams about how in a different life I might have become an investigative journalist. Unfortunately, having spent so much of my life observing, I developed the unhelpful traits of social anxiety, shyness, and conflict avoidance, all of which don't lend themselves to the idea of a dogged reporter knocking on doors and holding public figures to account. Because of this, I'd let my fantasy of becoming a journalist fall to the wayside. Until, that is, I came across the genre of graphic journalism, alternatively known as reportage illustration, visual journalism, comics journalism, visual reportage, non-fiction cartooning, and graphic non-fiction, or other variations on the theme. Graphic journalism is broadly defined as investigative non-fiction, in which the words and images are codependent. However, from-life reportage illustration doesn't necessarily include text and can still, under some circumstances, be considered graphic journalism. Graphic journalism juxtaposes text and images to report on current affairs, specific events, complex concepts, particular people and places, often focusing on voices and subjects that typically go underreported in mainstream media. Curiosity piqued, I decided I'd like to learn more about the world of graphic journalism. Who's doing it? Who's it for? What's it adding to the journalism ecosystem? Could I be cut out for it? Where does it sit alongside more traditional forms of journalism? What about the issue of journalistic objectivity? What, if anything, does it offer that photojournalism or film or written reporting doesn't? Essentially, in our age of instantaneous digital documentation and dissemination, what is the point of graphic journalism? I'll begin with these drawings by British reportage illustrator Anna Cattermole. These are just a couple of images from the 50 drawings that make up Cattermole's project From the Loft Floor, in which she spent time on location from 2010 to 2012 in the boat shed of a shipbuilder, observing and documenting the process of building a wooden pilot cutter. I find these drawings to be an elegant example of how reportage illustration doesn't have to be hard-hitting or political, it can simply be documentary. Reportage can turn our attention not just to the wrongs of society, but to places where we wouldn't have access, or to places we wouldn't think to look. Reading an essay about reportage drawing written by Anna Cattermole, published in Witness, Reportage and Documentary, a publication produced following the 2014 Falmouth Illustration Forum, I came across a passage I thought might help answer my question about the point of graphic journalism. Every colour chosen, every mark made in every drawing was a result of multiple different decisions made one after another during a sustained period of concentration. All of these decisions were a reaction to my environment during a specific time frame. This reflected my experience of time and my experience of the place. So, paradoxically, I would argue that a drawn record is a more accurate record than the dominant form of reportage, photography. The photograph may be a minutely accurate record of an instant, but is less in accord with our experience of an event. A drawing more accurately shows the way we experience time and the fragmented way we remember. In this passage, I believe Cattermole is suggesting that the process and time it takes to put marks on paper can reflect more accurately the real experience of time passing. This seemed to make sense. If you're observing a scene unfolding in real time, things will obviously change. People and objects will move, weather will change, emotions too. My drawings would change as the world around me changed. In this way, the drawing is a living representation of a specific place in a specific time window. And so I thought perhaps that's it. Maybe that's what's unique about reportage illustration, the way it captures the passage of time. But then after some more reflection I thought, what about video? Surely video captures time in the most representative and accurate way to how we experience it. Can the way drawing captures time be the thing that makes it unique and relevant? Possibly not. And then I realised perhaps I was missing part of Cattermole's point. While I drew on location, I absorbed what was happening around me, Through drawing, I was trying to document what I saw and to give some impression of what I heard, smelt, or observed. It's not just that the artist-reporter is shaping their illustration to depict the unfolding scene before them. It is also that the unfolding scene is shaping how the artist can carry out that depiction. A drawing can contain much of the human experience that created it, such as feeling uncomfortable in a location, what can be touched, smelt, and heard. Drawing is not a passive recording device, it is active and two-sided. If you're in a busy crowd with no space to move, or in the freezing cold, your mark-making will show this. Through on-the-spot drawing, you can experience the direct atmosphere of a situation. An interview with First Hand, a reportage drawing collective, is documented in the book Reportage Illustration. In this interview, they suggest that a good piece of reportage illustration should put you in the shoes of the person who made it and enable you to understand how they felt. Another fun example of the way a location can dictate how a reportage illustrator is able to respond to, document, and even inhabit the events taking place can be seen with the British artist Jill Gibbon, who has been covertly sketching London arms fairs since 2007. Gibbon disguises herself in businesswoman attire, complete with a string of plastic pearls. She has created a fake name and a fake persona as a global security expert to be able to gain entry to these fairs. She says her aim is to penetrate the veneer of respectability that veils these events, and does so by sneaking in a discreet sketchbook to capture the business of selling weapons of mass destruction. Her drawings are sparse and quick. You can feel the urgency of trying to capture the moment before being noticed by an unfriendly security guard or CEO. Her compositions are glimpses of what's not meant to be seen. Close cropped and awkward, they feel like the footage you might get when using a hidden camera. And it isn't just their physical presence a reporter needs to negotiate. There's also the impact of the personal biases, life experiences, and opinions which they bring with them when making their observations. Illustrators can never be truly impartial or objective. Even in the absence of an obvious human narrative, the living, breathing illustrator is always the conduit through which the understanding of their subject is described. Joe Sacco is arguably the modern pioneer of comics journalism, and in contrast to the reportage illustrators I've mentioned already, he doesn't draw on location. Sacco trained as a journalist and uses traditional reporting methods like conducting interviews, taking meticulous notes, snapping photos and visiting archives in order to create his comics. Sacco foregrounds himself as a character in his work, reporting in the first person on the ground in conflict-impacted areas such as Palestine and Bosnia. In this 2011 interview, Sacco articulates why he chooses to depict himself and his opinions in his comics.
When you depict yourself, you are able to sort of have a conversation with the reader about your prejudices and their prejudices. And I think that's why I think the nature of objectivity is ridiculous, especially a Western reporter going to so let's say an Islamic culture. I mean, the idea that a Western reporter thinks of him or herself as objective is just ridiculous, because we all have our prejudices about how they have their society and what they do. So just admit it, and let's go from there. You know, I want to feel like I'm having a conversation with a reporter across a table over a drink. I don't want to feel like someone telling me, you know, over the intercom system, I'm a fly on the wall and this is what I saw. And it doesn't, I'm neutral, I don't know one way or the other. This guy said this, I saw that, but I don't know, I'm not going to say. That's rubbish to me. Tell me something, you know.
Literary and comics scholar Hilary Shute argues that the comics medium is a conspicuously artificial form, and that this allows it to be constantly aware of its own mediation. Meaning, I think, that comics, because they are drawn, can never be mistaken for absolute reality. The viewer will automatically be aware that these are marks filtered through another person's eyes, mind and hand. The fact that they are drawn alludes to their inherent subjectivity, whereas we have a tendency to assume that traditional reportage and photography is objective, omniscient, and somehow authorless. Photographers were deemed recorders rather than reporters, as if their points of view were as neutral as those of a machine. But there is someone behind the camera choosing what's in the frame. And there is someone with thoughts and opinions writing BBC copy, even if it doesn't seem like it. When a graphic journalist places themselves and their thoughts on the page, next to the subject they are reporting on, is clearly and honestly subjective. The audience is allowed to interpret the information provided with the knowledge that this is a particular perspective being presented, Not the facts, not the truth, but a truth, or a collection of truths that create a complex picture. All truth is mediated, and we ignore this fact at the expense of our critical faculties. But it's possible that graphic journalism can help find a way to revealing truths that often go overlooked by mainstream media. Drawing can foster deeper understanding and connection between the artist-reporter and the subject. For the artist, drawing is discovery. It is the actual act of drawing that forces the artist to look at the object in front of him, to dissect it in his mind's eye, and put it back together again. In an interview featured in the book Creating Comics as Journalism, Memoir and Non-Fiction, the political comic artist Peter Cooper says, "The artist is forced to participate in the situation, and there tends to be more information in a drawing that gives a deeper sense of the event. A photo can be taken on the run, and the photographer can do so without any intersection with the subject. In a drawing done on the spot, this is impossible. A graphic journalist sketching on location is exposed. They can't hide behind a camera. This can have the effect of inviting subjects in. People may be curious about what the artist is drawing and strike up conversations that wouldn't otherwise have been had. This kind of spontaneous human interaction is exactly what graphic journalist Wendy McNaughton looks for when making her work. In this clip from her 2021 TED Talk, she discusses an unlikely interaction that led to an even more unlikely sense of mutual understanding.
I was on the road in Utah, drawing and talking to people, when I spotted on the side of the road a hand-painted wooden sign. It said, "Bootmaker." I stopped. A tall, white, handlebarred mustache man wearing a cowboy shirt opened the door and found me, a sketchbook-carrying, jumpsuit-wearing, urban lefty lesbian smiling like waving like a dork. When I spotted the stuffed cougar on the wall behind him, this vegetarian thought she knew all she needed to know about Don the Bootmaker. Every tool in that shop held a story, and he was so happy to share it with somebody who was genuinely curious and interested. By the end of the day, Don and I looked very different to one another. And this drawing, which ended up in my visual column in the New York Times, or as Don likes to call it, the fake news media, now hangs framed on the wall of his big game trophy room.
In their latest report published this year, the Reuters Institute, who studied the future of global journalism, found that many communities felt marginalised by the media. Most saw news media as not only out of touch, but at times an especially harmful force that did real damage to their communities, either through neglecting them altogether or exploiting them, reinforcing harmful stereotypes or sensationalising in divisive and polarising ways. Could having more nuanced and empathetic reporting like McNaughton's help to patch up the growing divides between the public and the news media, or even help humanise perspective between polarised groups? People like to be listened to, and drawing is a type of listening. Another fairly obvious thing I've failed to mention so far that sets graphic journalism apart from other non-fiction media is the way it can visually communicate. Drawing has the ability to render topics that may be too harrowing as a photograph, or too abstract as words. Drawing can bear witness to trauma, protect anonymous sources, or enter spaces a camera can't. It can visualise internal thoughts and feelings, or even the supernatural. Lauren Redness is a graphic non-fiction author. Redness has made a career of giving flesh and blood to abstraction, of working, coaxing, and teasing it from the realm of the unsayable into the light. In her 2020 book, Oak Flat, A Fight for Sacred Land in the American West, Redness uses illustration to visualise how copper is formed in outer space, and how it is mined here on Earth. She also uses it to depict the spiritual connection the native Apache residents have with the land at Oak Flat. I think photographs, or words alone, would communicate these subjects in a far less emotionally rich way. Comics journalists achieve layers of meaning inaccessible to prose journalism alone, because of comics graphic language that blends words and images. In an interview featured on the Krauss Essay Prize website, Redness explains, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm after. Words and images, each saying distinct things that add up to something more together. The words may convey specific facts or details that would be impossible to get across in pictures, while the images depict a mood or a moment that is made more poignant by the lack of exposition, or vice versa. Graphic journalism has the ability to lend narrative to image, whether that involves text or not. Images alone may move us or transport us to a particular time and place, but a single snapshot doesn't necessarily allow us to understand. By using visual storytelling techniques, graphic journalism can bring about a deeper connection and understanding with the subject. When coupled in a non-fiction comic, art and carefully gathered facts allow readers to see not only the world as it is, but themselves as they are. It's an immensely powerful medium. But I think I need to wrap up now, as time's running out. I'm aware that I definitely didn't manage to fit in all of the things that make graphic journalism unique and worthwhile, but I hope I've made a case for it nonetheless. I think that the way graphic journalism can conjure a sense of time, capture the whole human experience, reflect on the nature of truth and objectivity, forge connections between reporter and subject and audience, and communicate through visual storytelling what might be considered impossible to communicate, definitely gives it a point. Graphic journalism opens doors to understanding that without which might otherwise remain closed. We all need as richly developed an understanding of the world around us as possible. A world, let us remember, that contains burning forests, nationalist leaders, pandemics, oceans full of plastic, and in which 1 in 10 human beings does not have access to clean drinking water. We need literacy, both for successful navigation of that world and for escaping it and replacing it with something better.